Hey all, Brian here. So I'm going to read chapter 13 of Warrior Priest of Dmon-li, book 3 of the Morcyth Saga. Sorry it took me so long to get to this one. I've been doing some stuff. It's been a weekend with my girlfriend, so hopefully I'll be back on track now. So here's chapter 13. They're currently fleeing from Abula-Mazki, the warrior priest. He's got some Grey Wolf clan members with him, and they're on their trail, and they're trying to get away and survive. All right, chapter 13. Continuing north until it was almost dark, they then moved toward the river so James could create a pool of water to search the area. He dug his pool, and once it was filled and became placid, scanned the countryside for hostiles. To the south was clear. He felt satisfaction when he realized his attempts to thwart pursuit had met with success. To the east, hang on. I have a comma after the for some reason. To the east, all he saw were more plains. Looking westward past the river, he found the north-south road. He scanned both directions only to find it deserted. There was a small town sitting at a crossroads farther to the north, but nothing about it concerned him. The road went through the town as it continued its way north, while another one branched off, heading due west. The town boasted a garrison, but it didn't look to be very large and showed no sign of anyone preparing to leave. One second here. He moved the image northward and found the river, where it continued through more plains until entering another set of hills. Getting up, he said, "Looks like there is no one near, so a fire should be all right." "Good," Miko exclaimed. "I hate being in the dark." He searched for fuel for the fire, but there wasn't much available. When he had gathered all he could find, he looked at the small pile and said, "I doubt if this will last the night." "Probably not," agreed Jiron, "but it should last through dinner." About that time, James returned to camp with 3 small rabbits. Jiron took them from him. That sounds better. Jiron took them from him and proceeded to get them ready for the fire. James sat and rested, a little tired from the magic expended earlier in the day. He did seem to be able to do more with less effect as he went along. Must be like weightlifting. The more you do, the more you can do. Michael got the fire going, and in no time the rabbits were cooking. The evening passed uneventfully. After dinner, they took their turns at watch. Before setting out in the morning, James returned to the small pool and again scanned the area for hostiles. "Jiron!" he hollered. When Jiron came over, with Michael right behind, he showed them the large force of riders. Where are they?" Michael asked. "Best I can figure, about an hour to the southeast," he said. "Abula-Mazki is with them. It looks like 2 or 3 times the number that was surprised back in the hills." "Was that all?" Jiron asked. As he continued to scan, they saw another force approaching from the northwest, having already entered the west side of the hills that the river flowed through to the north. "Looks like they have us boxed in." "If we move quickly to the north along the river," Jiron suggested, "we may be able to move past them before they connect with the riders behind us." "Then we better hurry," James said, getting up. They mounted and quickly broke into a gallop heading north. He wished he still had his mirror so he could scan while riding, but that was long gone at the bottom of the ocean. Keeping a quick pace, they reached the hills to the north. Hoping to have beaten the soldiers coming from the west, they continued following the river. Suddenly from the west, they saw a scout crest the hill. They watched as he raised a horn to his lips and blew a series of notes. "That's done it," James said, just before a rock left his hand and sailed toward the scout. The rock flew true and struck him, knocking the rider from his horse. "They'll be on us for sure now," Jiron said, as he once more spurred his horse onward, the others right behind. As they rode, the ground changed from hilly grasslands to more of a desert, like what they experienced while searching for Miko. Another horn rang out. James glanced back and saw another scout. Several more riders appeared alongside him. "We've got company," he hollered. Spurring their horses to even greater speed, they flew alongside the river. The hills on either side rose, and James realized they were entering a canyon. As the sides continued to rise, he was quick to realize that if Abula-Mazki sent forces to the other side, they may very well be trapped. The ground became rockier and less stable the deeper into the canyon they went, forcing them to slow their speed. Behind them, the foot soldiers had entered the canyon and were about a mile away. Progressing still farther into the canyon, they came across a series of wooden stakes with wooden crossbeams. Skulls and bones hung from them, as well as pieces of leather, which James thought might be human skin. "What are those?" Jiron asked. "I'm not sure," James replied. "They can't bode well, though." As they passed the structures, they saw others scattered about the floor of the canyon. Some were not very large, though a couple were even bigger and more complex than those they first encountered. "Might be a burial ground of some sort," he concluded. "Burial ground?" Michael asked. "Yeah," he said. "It feels that way." Nervous, Michael looked around. "James, look," Jiron said, directing his gaze back to the soldiers. James glanced back and saw the soldiers had stopped at the first of the stakes and skulls. "Seems they are reluctant to enter," Jiron observed. "Hope so," James said. "Maybe we shouldn't be here either," Michael said, as he continued glancing nervously around the canyon. "We have no choice," James said, as they continued making their way deeper into the canyon. They periodically glanced behind them, only to find that the soldiers continued to remain on the other side of the stakes. The deeper into the canyon they moved, the more of the burial sites they encountered. Some now actually had full skeletons laid out upon them. All the bones were human. Michael grew more and more nervous the farther they went. The canyon was absolutely silent. Not even the familiar sound of birds or animals could be heard. Only the rush of the river flowing by made any kind of noise. But even that had a hushed quality to it, as if it dared not disturb the peace of this place. With the sun already having moved past the lip of the canyon, the lengthening shadows gave the place an even more eerie feel. They continued for another hour or so when James decided to pause a moment to dig out a pool by the river to check on the pursuit. "Do we have to stop?" asked Miko. Being among the dead had made him very jumpy. "Yes," replied James. It will just take a moment. I want to do it before it gets dark." Once the pool was filled and the surface had stilled, James brought the forces behind them into view. The image shimmered a moment, and then they saw themselves by the river. He scrolled the image to the soldiers at the boundary. A large force of foot and horsemen were gathered together. Bringing the focus closer, they saw two men arguing animatedly. One of them was Abula-Mazki. What would I wouldn't give for a little sound? The two men were obviously at odds. From the way Abula-Mazki gesticulated, it would seem he wanted them to enter the canyon. The officer was adamantly refusing. In an enraged fit, Abula-Mazki stretched out his hand, and they watched the officer have some sort of seizure and collapse to the ground. Abula-Mazki then turned and spoke to the others assembled before him. The death of their officer must have given them the impetus they needed, for they began to hesitantly move into the canyon. "They mean to follow," Jiron said from over his shoulder. "So it would seem," agreed James. "What's at the other end of the canyon?" Jiron asked. The enemies moved quickly until it reached the northern end, where they found another large force waiting. They seemed to be settling in and preparing defenses. Tents and campfires had sprung up throughout the assembled forces. "They plan to force us north and then get hammered between both armies." "Yeah, and with his magic to counter mine," James said, "we're dead." The enemies disappeared as they stood. Jiron looked around, then up at the canyon walls. "You aren't serious?" asked Miko when he realized what Jiron was thinking. "We can't climb that far." He looked up at the imposing sides of the canyon. In some places, the surface was almost vertical. "We have several hours before the southern force gets here," Jiron said. "It'll be a hard climb, but what other choice do we have?" He walked to his horse and took his things. James followed suit. When he saw Michael just standing there, he said, "Come on, we can do this. We have a better chance of scaling the walls of the canyon than surviving the battle that's to come." Coming over to his horse, Michael got his things. Then he looked dubiously at the canyon wall above. "Couldn't we just scare them like we did to that bunch earlier?" he asked. "I thought about that," James told him. "If it were just the men, then I'd try. But not with that warrior priest among them. He would for sure see through any illusion and most likely be able to counter it." "Oh yeah," he said, disappointed. "We need to hurry if we are to beat the failing light," Jiron said. Then he moved from the river and began to ascend to the top of the canyon. Now, at this point in time when I was writing this, I had no idea what was going to happen as they scaled the walls. What followed just occurred to me as I was writing it. Yeah. I mean, Since everyone here should already have read this at least once, and if you haven't, spoiler alert. But all these are going to have spoiler alerts, so just deal with it. The fire. I never had a thought about the fire. That never even occurred to me. I mean, the Star of Morcyth, I wasn't even sure if it, I don't remember if it was in my head, what it was ended up being. I think at this point, the Star of Morcyth was simply that medallion that Igor had given James. I think at this point, the Star of Morcyth was just that medallion, not the Star of Morcyth. Okay, I hadn't gotten to the point of the focal points for the God's magic on the world. I hadn't reached that point yet. And so when I came to the fire, that's when that clicked in and began. Okay, so let's get back to this. Michael started to follow and then paused when James hadn't moved. He glanced back and saw him staring intently at the horses. Suddenly, the horses began whinnying in fear and bolted along the river to the north. James then turned to follow Michael and Jiron. When he saw Michael looking, he explained, "Didn't want them to find the horses here and know where we started climbing up. This might give us more time." One second. Michael just nodded slightly as James joined him. He turned back and resumed following Jiron as he worked his way up. At first, the way was fairly easy and not too steep. The sides of the canyon were composed mostly of shale and the ground was covered in loose deposits. This made for an unstable surface, causing their feet to at times slip out from under them. The canyon continued to darken as the sun sank to the horizon. The sun still shone on the far side of the canyon, and Michael kept glancing over to it, dreading the time when it would no longer be there. Jiron had moved ahead of the side of the canyon. James and Michael stayed together, helping each other. The way was beginning to grow steeper, and the loose shell was causing them to slip more and more often. Once, Jiron started a small landslide which pelted them with rubble and coated them with dirt. "Watch it!" James hollered up to him. "Sorry," they heard from up above. After climbing what seemed a very long time, James looked down to the river, but was unable to see it. The bottom of the canyon was hidden in shadows with the setting of the sun. It no longer shone upon the opposite wall of the canyon. "Hope they're not below us yet," he thought to himself. He looked again, but couldn't make out anyone or anything down there in the dark. "Ah!" Suddenly from up ahead, they heard Jiron cry out. James looked up, but other than some shell falling along the side of the canyon, couldn't see anything. "Jiron!" James shouted. "Are you all right?" When no answer was forthcoming, he doubled his speed, sending a cascade of rocks down after him. Michael hurried along beside. When they neared... hang on. When they neared where they believed Jiron to have been, they saw a darker shadow among the many others. He quickly realized that it was a hole. The ground had fallen away beneath Jiron. "Michael," he said, "stay here." It looked like the ground gave way beneath him. "Okay," Michael replied as he came to a halt, maintaining his balance on the unstable surface. James moved to the edge of the hole and peered over the edge, but all he could see was blackness. "Jiron," he whispered down. "James," he heard reply from below. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I only fell about 15 feet, he explained. "Help me out of here, will you?" "Sure," he said. He created his glowing orb so he could see how best to get him out. As the orb sprang into being, it revealed the face of a corpse only inches from his own. James screamed and jumped back in panic. The light from the orb vanished when his concentration was broken. He lost his balance and tumbled down the side of the canyon for a ways before coming to a stop. His heart beat wildly. He picked himself up just as Michael reached his side. "What happened?" he asked, eyes wide with fear. "Thought I saw something." "What?" "A dead guy." "Dead?" Michael asked in a fearful tone. "It's probably someone who had been buried here," he explained. "It just took me by surprise, was all." Getting back to his feet, he climbed back up to the opening. "James!" he heard Jiron yelling as he again approached the opening. "Where are you?" As he reached the edge, and said, he reached the edge and said, "Sorry, got startled and lost my balance." "Are you okay?" came Jiron's voice from the darkness below. "I think so," he said. "Maybe some scratches. You may have fallen in someone's burial mound." The orb once more sprang to life, and he saw what had startled him. On the right edge of the opening, a corpse laid on its back, and his face had only been inches from James's when he'd originally made the orb. He looked down to find Jiron standing in the middle of the circular room with several resting places for the deceased set in tiers along the walls. The whole room looked to be rather crudely done. The biers dug out from the walls and the dead placed within. "How are we going to get you out of there?" James asked. "We have no rope." "I could try climbing up along the walls," he said, indicating the biers with the corpses. "All right," James said. The whole place gave him the creeps, and it felt like the corpse lying exposed next to him was looking at him. But he was certain that was just the product of an overactive imagination. Jiron climbed up the biers. He was careful not to disturb the dead any more than absolutely necessary. Suddenly, from behind him, he heard Miko cry out, "James!" The ground had given way beneath him, and he had fallen. He screamed as he dropped below the surface. "What happened?" Jiron asked from below. James looked back down to Jiron. And said, "Miko fell through. The whole place must be riddled with these things." Miko fell through too. This whole place must be riddled with these things. "James," he heard Michael's panic cry. "Just hold there a moment," he said to Jiron. "I need to check on him." "Don't take too long," he said from halfway up the side of the biers. James moved closer to where Miko had fallen through, and when he reached the side of the hole, the ground beneath him caved in as well, and he landed upon a bier. "Yeah!" he cried out when he felt bones crunch beneath him. He rolled off the bier, falling another few feet to the floor. He felt a hand on his shoulder. "James, are you okay?" Michael's voice quavered in fear and worry. The orb blossomed into life, and Michael gasped with shock at the dead lying in the walls. One corpse laid in a heap in the middle of the floor, most likely the one James had landed on when he initially fell. "Calm down," James exclaimed commandingly, trying to halt the panic he saw ready to consume Miko. The young lad. Because Miko is only 10 years old now? That'll change though. Mike, he got up and grabbed hold of him, shaking him slightly. "Miko," he cried, trying to get him to focus on his face and not on their surroundings. Michael's eyes slowly relaxed as they focused on James standing before him. "Relax," he assured him. "We're going to be okay." "Where are we?" Michael said when he got his panic under control. James glanced around the small chamber and said, "I think we're in a burial mound." He saw an opening in the side of the chamber and moved toward it. "Looks like it might be part of a catacomb." "What's that?" asked Michael, keeping very close to James. "A catacomb is a place where people are buried," he explained. "It's usually associated with a church or a religion." "Jiron!" James hollered out the opening. They heard movement coming toward them, and Jiron appeared. "Are you both okay?" "Physically, we're fine," replied James. Then he indicated Michael with a slight nod. "Ah, yes," he said when he saw the frightened look on the boy's face. "This place is a bit unnerving. What are we to do now?" "I think we're in a catacomb," James told him. "If so, it must lead somewhere. Maybe we could follow it and find the way out." Michael's eyes widened. "Are you crazy? We have to leave." Hearing his voice echo, he shrank in on himself and then said in a much quieter tone, "This is no place for the living." "If we return to the surface, as likely as not we'll fall through again," he explained. "Plus, they will never find us here unless they stumble upon the opening, which in the dark is highly unlikely." "How do you know there's even a way out?" Michael asked. "I don't," he replied. "But the dead had to be brought here somehow. The two chambers we fell in are connected," Jiron said. "Stands to reason there should be a way out." James moved closer to Michael and said soothingly, "Just stay close and we'll make it out, okay?" Michael nodded. James moved to the burial chamber's opening and took the lead. Before leaving, he glanced over his shoulder and said, "Follow me and stay close." Jiron nodded and Michael said, "Don't worry about that." He turned back toward the opening and left the burial chamber. That is chapter 13. So we're going to get into a burial catacomb area, I guess. And I really haven't read this for probably 15 years. I have a good idea of what's coming, but you guys probably know it better than I do. Anyway, that's chapter 13. We'll do 14 again soon. I really want to do one a day, but sometimes I can't quite make that. I'm getting a lot closer on getting this on Relic done, and I spend some time working on that. I got a couple other projects in the works too, but yeah. I don't know if you guys have done this yet, but the copies you have right now are the ones that I'm fixing as I'm doing this, right? So what I'm reading is subtly different than what you have in your copies on your computers. Now, if you're watching this after I fixed it and uploaded it, then it's exactly the same. But right now, today, as I'm talking to you right now, and probably for the next, let's see, there's about 6. So another 13 chapters or more, 23 chapters or no, yeah, about 23 chapters or more. Until I get those finished and updated, then what I'm reading is going to be subtly different than what you have. I don't know, has anyone actually thought to look to see if what I'm reading, how different it is? Because I am changing it all the time. In this last chapter, see, I read it once. I read it once through the night or day before, and then I read it now with you guys, and I still make changes. But when I did it, there was a time when I believe James, I had used Jiron, not James. There was quotation marks where they shouldn't be, periods where they shouldn't be, further and farther. I had the hardest time back then, and people commented on it, and it took me forever to figure out the distance or the difference between those two. Further is like you're furthering a plan. Farther is distance, like I'm going farther, or we're going to further this along. So yeah, and they were all wrong. They were all wrong. You know, in this chapter 13 here, whenever I says they're going farther into the canyon, originally they were going further into the canyon, which to the layman's ears sounds right, but it's wrong. And so I'm trying to fix that because it is wrong. I mean, it sounds okay, but it is technically incorrect. And for people who are really sticklers for such things, that can really jar them out of the story. So I do try to fix things as I learn them. Oh, when I first started, and I may have mentioned this before, one of the biggest things that I was writing wrong was lightning. I wrote it lightening, you know, instead of Lightning, it was Ening. And lightning is what happens to a woman's uterus before it's just arrived to giving birth. So someone called me on that, and I fixed that right away. But little things like that, you know, most people when they read, they just fill it in themselves, and they don't notice, but some do. Anyway, that's the end of 13, and I'll get this uploaded, and we'll do number 14. I'm hoping tomorrow. We'll see what happens. Y'all take care.